Welcome to the Healthier Tech Podcast, the show about building a healthier relationship with modern technology. Now here are your hosts, R. Blank and Stephanie Warner.
Today we have a special guest, Katie Krimitsos, the creator of Women's Meditation Network. She is a true inspiration and a woman of many talents. Not only is she a successful podcaster with 10 guided meditation podcasts in her network, but she's also a writer at heart and a dedicated mother. She has a deep connection with nature, a love for animals, and is a devoted wife. So join us as we delve into Katie's journey to help women use the tool of meditation to know themselves and consciously create lives they love. Welcome, Katie, to the Healthier Tech Podcast.
Hey, how's it going? I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, the listeners don't know, but before this, we were chatting and I was commenting on just how happy you seemed just as soon as you got into the room. And then you stood up and showed us that your shirt says happy in big letters.
On point.
And for those of you listening on a podcast, you can actually check that out on our YouTube channel. So how did you
happy because I'm happy.
So, we can't afford the rights clearance on that, please.
Or you probably can't afford my voice, undulations on that either.
So how did you get into the field of meditation and mindfulness?
I started meditating, or I should say I discovered meditation when I was 19 years old, and I was taking a yoga class at Arizona State. And, the very last 5 or 10 minutes of yoga was this guided meditation. And I just very distinctly remember being wowed by the experience, not because it was this big giant, oh my God, I feel amazing, but because it was the first time that I can recall that my mind had actually slowed down a little bit. And my whole body just felt very, just really calm in a way it really never had before. So that was my first interest in it. And then, basically all of these years later, I'm 44 now, I have just been a consumer of meditation. I've been a seeker of the practice of meditation, always imperfectly. I'm definitely not, nor have I ever been one of those people who wakes up at 5 a.m. and sits on a meditation pillow with incense burning and perfect erect, sitting position. And I'm meditating for an hour with a blank mind. That has never been me. But I have absolutely seen how impactful over time meditation has been for me. So I became a podcaster in 2014. And I had a podcast back then. It was a business show called Biz Women Rock, where I interviewed other amazing, successful business women. And it was a really successful show. It, gave birth to a very successful coaching business for me. And I had this really intimate community of incredible women who I had the pleasure of supporting in their business journeys. And I loved it. And it was amazing. It was a really tough journey at first because I was sort of figuring things out. And then, pretty soon I was sort of humming along and I sort of had, the formula, if you will, on really how I was growing and what I was planning to do. And I loved it. And in early 2018, I had come up with this. I had just hit 6 figures the year before. I was on it. And so I was okay, I'm going to triple business this year. I know exactly what programs I'm rolling out. I know exactly who's going to be in them. I'm on it. And fast forward, now it's April of that same year. And I find out we're pregnant with my second daughter.
Wow.
And in a heartbeat, I don't want that business. Don't know why. Just immediately, my intuition was done. We're done. Don't want it anymore, which was very terrifying because that business model was one that required me to be the brand. It required me to show up. And so all of a sudden I was I don't want it. I don't want to show up.
Totally understand.
I have clients already. I remember I had just put the deposit down that I never got back. I just put the deposit down for the venue of the live event I was going to have in 2 or 3 months. And I the following week was going to be the week that I started marketing for it. And I was just done. No. And it's very scary. So for the next few weeks, basically almost 2 months, I just promised myself that I wouldn't make a big decision and just allowed myself to sort of be in the silence, if you will. Like I kind of maintained the clientele I had. I didn't launch anything new. I kept kind of showing up at bare minimum. And then I just allowed myself to just sort of like get really introspective and say like, what, if this is not what I want, what do I want? And I would go on walks with my husband every single day. And one day I'd be like, I am superwoman. I can make this work. A baby's not going to stop me. It's going to make me better. Right. It would have been 2 kids. Right. So, and then the next day I'd be like, I'm giving it all up. I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. That's it. I'm done with business. And so few weeks into this, daily vomiting process of emotions, my lovely husband, who is an angel and had been listening to me over and over again, says to me, I've sort of done my little verbal thing of the day, and there's this kind of silence. He's like, what about the meditation idea? And I said, well, what about it?
Is that his way of telling you to chill out?
Right. Well, yeah. You do not tell that to a pregnant lady. No.
Right.
What he was referring to was back in January of that year, this time when I was like, yes, I'm tripling business. I was doing this big, giant, like yearly plan and sort of putting the final touches on that. And in that plan, I had actually thought about a meditation podcast for women. And I did nothing with it because it didn't really fit in the model of my business. But my husband and I both sort of took note back in January, like that's a good idea, but I did nothing with it. So now fast forward, here we are in May of that same year of 2018. And he's saying, what about that meditation idea? And I'm like, well, what about it? And he's like, what about it? So that was the seed that planted for the Women's Meditation Network. And it allowed this very clear and sacred space that was very non-judgmental, very clear of any expectation. It just allowed that seed to kind of grow a little bit and say, like, what could this thing be? And we were well-versed enough in podcasting to have looked at the landscape already and disbelievingly said, I can't believe this space isn't taken up already. There was one other podcast out there that, if you put in the terms women in meditation, one podcast existed.
Wow.
So I was like, I can't believe this.
That's surprising.
Like, very, very disappointing, but very surprising. And I was like, oh, this is me. I'm going to be the giant in this industry. Like I have something to contribute here for that grouping of people, and I'm going to do it big. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, it sounds like you got to pioneer this, which is that's really exciting, because you don't see that very often. There's always, there's so much great content out. So that's awesome that you got to pioneer it. Can you tell us a little bit about what some of the challenges were to starting this effort, to starting the network and the podcast? And
yeah, I did not have the challenges that a normal startup podcast would have, be like the tech, how to create a program schedule, how to show up to the mic, because I had already had a podcasting history. So there was a lot that I did not need to overcome, which was amazing. But the parts that were challenging was a couple-fold. Number one is mostly the mindset and the mentality of who am I to create guided meditation? So much imposter syndrome. I don't have a degree or any certificate from any school of meditation. Like I just have been a practitioner of meditation for so long, but I can write and I have things to say that I want women to be able to hear. So let me just practice that. So it was, the immediate challenges were really who am I to do this, and just moving forward despite that. And really transcending a lot of that stuff. And then it became, the challenges were the very realistic challenges of being in the season of having 2 kids, 2 businesses, because there was about a year and a half that I managed all of those things all at once. So, while I had decided, when I knew that this was going to be the idea and that I was going to move forward with it, I decided not to launch any of those other big programs that I had decided on. Right. And instead just to maintain like, okay, coaching, that's the one thing that I could do. Let me do that, continued being pregnant, had my baby, was in this space of having an infant and a toddler, 2.5-year-old, 3-year-old. And then kind of that first year of oh my God, like just surviving that season, right? And still maintaining the old podcast, the old business, and the new podcast, and that whatever that new business was becoming. So those were the immediate challenges of making that transition.
Right. That's fascinating. And you're doing so many things all at once, and it seems like this kind of natural evolution. But can you talk about kind of how you went from your past business to what you're doing now? What did that evolution look like?
Yeah. So a couple of strategic things. Number one is that I was very conscious that I wanted to leverage the current community that I had, the current listenership, in order to seed the new podcast and the new business. And
Smart.
it was a little tricky because it wasn't like a non sequitur, it was a non sequitur. It didn't feel, it's like, okay, are you interested in business or do you like meditation? They were seemed completely off, right? But I knew that there was a percentage of listeners of my old brand that meditated, that really enjoyed it, or at least loved me enough to try and wanted to support. So in the beginning, I did things like, when I first launched, Meditation for Women is the name of the original podcast that I have. And so that was back in summer of 2018 that I launched that. And so what I did is I had a contest, and I basically said, hey, for anyone who goes and, does the thing, like rates and reviews, shares it, all that sort of stuff, subscribes, I will give you a free half an hour of my consulting time, and we'll see how that goes. Strategically, that did two things. Number one, it seeded my first show. And then it also sort of gave me a nice little pipeline of potential, one-on-one clients that I still wanted to have. So that was really powerful and immediately got people over there listening. And then it was more about what I was saying no to in that transition versus what I was, and how I was structuring the yeses. So I'll give you examples of that. I had mentioned earlier that I said no to all the new things to launch, which was a very scary thing because I knew revenue was going to come down. And that was very scary, but I knew the things I said yes to, like the coaching, I needed to repackage in a way that could be financially supportive while I was doing this transition. So, coaching is a little bit of a slog, in a marketing slog, in the sense of like, okay, I'm getting people into sort of like these types of packages for X amount of weeks or months long. And I'm constantly sort of redoing that all the time. So what I came up with was, before I had my baby, was I'm going to do a year-long coaching program. I've earned enough stripes in the years past to feel like I have a good amount of people who would say yes to this. And it was a high price item. And so, and I knew, like, if I do this for a year, I don't have to market. I don't have to like bring new people in. And in that first year of baby, which I'm not going to have too many brains or energy really for that, that's how I can maximize that. So that's what I ended up doing. Which allowed literally everything else that I had said yes to slow down so it could all get focused in on this. Now, I only ended up with like 3 members in that, but those 3 people were there consistent time. I could rely on the time. I could rely on the revenue coming in, and I didn't have to push out anything new. So the responsibilities for the old business became very minor, which was a blessing, which is really what I wanted. And then even, for the Women's Meditation Network, again, it was about what I said yes and what I said no to. The Women's Meditation Network as a whole really did not make money for its first 3 years. And we're only 4.5 years old. So probably about 2.5. I mean, we were making money, but we weren't really profitable until about 3 years in. And so, and not even were we not profitable, we were like spending money on it, right? Like I refinanced my house in order to take out cash to like put into that business, right?
Wow.
So yeah, because I believed in it that much and it was growing and I knew it had the wings. So so I remember being on calls, with a business buddy at the time, and I'm like, oh my God, like feeling the stress of the finances, right? And I'm like, okay, maybe I could like launch like a meditation, how to meditate program, or 30 days meditation, these like more high ticket items that I was used to doing. And she was beautiful and reflected back to me and said, Katie, you are welcome to do that. You know how to do that. You do that very well. But I want to remind you of the goals that you had at the beginning of this business. You wanted a business that didn't demand that didn't demand your time like that. You wanted a business that gave you true time freedom, which was one of the reasons I created this business and this business model.
Yeah.
And if you do that, which you can, you're not choosing that. And so I very consciously was like, okay, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to continue to be in the red for a little while to believe and to play into and to make sure I'm telling the universe out there that no, this is what I want and I'm dedicated to it. But when that needle threaded, it definitely flipped.
Yeah,
And
no,
things were
being
great.
responsible for a business in the red is definitely stressful. And so
Yeah.
from what I'm hearing from you is a lot of faith in your dream. And I was reading about you and your story, and I gather that in college there was a guy who said something to you that having dreams would only set you up for failure, and that led you to be discouraged for a while. And when I read that, I was reminded there's a line that I used to be when I was growing up. I was a big Simpsons fan, and there's a
Yes.
line once where I think it's Homer talking to Bart, and he says, "Trying is the first step towards failure." And so I'm wondering, right? Because you went from being discouraged in your college years to now having tremendous optimism and faith in, and why do you think a comment like, given obviously that you have this potential for so much energy and belief in yourself, why do you think that a single comment like that could have such a major impact on you, and what eventually served as your wake-up call?
Number one, that was my brother, and who I love, and he's a
Those
beautiful
siblings.
human being, and I respect him a lot. So there was a lot of stock I took in who my brother was and the things he said. I have since learned, who he is, and he's a beautiful man, and I've recognized some of those differences. So that's a lot of it. But that comment shut me up for 10 years plus. And it wasn't until I met my now husband, Chris, who was a fellow dreamer. And before I met him, I was sort of on the path of like, go get a job and, work in corporate. And maybe the answer to my happiness is just the better job. Maybe it's a different industry. Like it was the finding, like there's something out here in the regular world that I'm searching for. And then I met him, and, here was somebody who had just like, my husband has been following his dreams since he was a baby, and it has brought him on amazing highs, and it's kicked him down very low. And he doesn't know anything else. Like that's what he does. And so he's developed this incredible dexterity and resilience, and the light you see in him is so obvious. Like, so when I met him, I was just like, wow, like I didn't know that was possible, right? Like my parents definitely always taught us like follow what you love and the money will always work out, right? Follow your heart. Everything always works out as long as you follow what you really want to do and who you really are. And so there was that, but then here was this man who was actually living it in real life. Like and so it was this eye opener for me to be like, okay. And so it ended up just being a lot of practice of me following, and believe me, I definitely had an enormous amount of practice prior to him of like following my intuition, and like that's the not popular decision, but that feels like the right one. Like I remember making some big adult decisions in my life at a very young age, and it always worked out, right? So I had that muscle built. But when I met him, I just like took it up a giant notch, and all of a sudden it was like, I get to script this whole thing. Like there's nothing I have to do. I can create it. And so it's been a gazillion baby steps along the way, but a lot of that muscle has been built up. So by the time this experience happened, I heard that intuition of like, hey, Katie, completely drop the business that supports your entire family and go start something new. You have no right to do. I'm like, okay, I got it. I know you, voice. I don't know exactly what's on the other side, but I trust you.
Yeah.
So,
if you build it, they will
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, I love that you had an example of like what dreaming, like you had another dreamer who was doing it. So you have that example to kind of give you the permission and the freedom to explore more. And I'd like to kind of know a little bit more about what the Woman Meditation Network is and how that you've taken that and impacted other women.
Yeah. So the Women's Meditation Network is basically a producer of meditations and content. That's really who we are. We are a media company. I kind of look at us as like a publishing house. We just happen to be really heavy in the podcasting space at this moment. There's definitely potential for a lot of the other arenas. And so we currently actually have 11 podcasts. We just launched our
it's
11th
11.
one. Yeah.
Wow, it changed since the intro was written.
I know.
Yeah.
That's how fast we're moving here. Yeah. So I see the network as providing little pieces of love and light out into the world that can feel really dark and full of hate sometimes. And so it's up to me to create these products, these final products are these MP3 files, these meditations that get delivered on whatever meditation or whatever app you're listening to. And my goal in the content and the product that's being delivered is to allow the woman listening to I'm going to dangle in front of you. I'm going to tease you with better sleep, more calm, feeling a sense of relaxation. Yes, because you're going to get all those things. But ultimately, for any of us who have done meditation in whatever irregular or imperfect practice that we've done, ultimately what ends up happening is my true desire. It is you are creating a space to pause and to get to know yourself a lot better. And when you really get to know yourself, you then start creating a life that you love because you actually start listening to that voice rather than all the noise out in the world. So the Women's Meditation Network as a company is the mass producer of high quality and high quantity meditations and content and sounds that allows more and more women to have access to that.
That's great. And it's just funny the timing on this, because you're saying, when you slow down, when you calm down, it creates the space for bigger and broader ideas and that spirit. And Stephanie can tell you, I was just actually telling the team that today, not in terms of meditation, but in terms of agile planning for the company. I'm like,
Yeah.
we need to be planning. You guys need to be planning to do less, because that's what creates the space for these bigger
Yes.
ideas. And this is a really, for those who I'm looking at, sorry if you see me looking away, it's because I'm on multiple screens and I have your website open. It's womensmeditationnetwork.com. All the podcasts are there. It's a really impressive array. And it's such a, because on this show, we talk about uses of tech that may be unhealthy, and then also certain uses of tech that are, I think, fantastic uses of tech. And when you take a phone, which if it has Facebook or Instagram loaded on it, is a stress and anxiety inducing device, and instead you load up one of your podcasts, you've now turned that device into something that actually counteracts a lot of the other impacts of the phone itself. And because it's a podcast, it can be downloaded and listened to in airplane mode. So people don't have to be interrupted or get notifications or SMS updates or anything like that. So I really like that. But as we talked about just before the show, right, we also like talking about, some of the people who are most active in seeking out meditation, they are trying to overcome some of the stresses and anxieties that have resulted from their interaction in the daily world, which includes technology. So I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, because you've built a community, and what are you hearing from your community about how they feel about technology, even if they're not explicitly saying, my phone is doing X to me. What are the sensations and the emotions that people in your community are feeling that are coming from their experiences with technology?
Yeah, great question. And I will tell you what I hear by answering what kind of meditations I've written for them. So the kinds of meditations I've written for them, because I've been either asked directly for it or because it's been the rumbling out there, is a social media detox meditation, a news detox, like a lot of detox types of
Really?
yeah,
Yes.
You're getting
um,
specific requests for
oh
that,
yeah,
huh?
oh yeah, and a lot of praise afterwards of like, oh my God, I needed that, thank you. Like a news detox type of meditation.
And so do you, when you get those requests in, do you pick one of your almost baker's dozen of shows that it fits in, or do you think, oh, maybe I should do a whole new show for this?
Good question. So my brain is always thinking that because I want to keep growing. But no, typically what I'll do is I will start writing it. I usually actually start with meditation for women. That's the original show, because that show is sort of has like a little bit of everything. So I feel like I can sort of test it there. And then, if it's one that might be more specific to sleep, oh, hey, I can't sleep because my mind's, on social media or whatever it is, then I've definitely put ones over there simultaneously. So, but a very close sister to the actual tech that I write to a lot is those feelings that arise when you're on tech too much.
Hmm.
Overwhelm, comparison, not good enough, just a gazillion things going on in your brain, so much energy in your body, you can't sleep, even though your body's exhausted. I mean, I literally have a meditation called, when you're exhausted but can't sleep. That's the title of the meditation. And it's
I'm
like,
pretty
yep,
sure that's
got
me every night.
Yeah, that's
right.
everybody every night, increasingly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to, and I literally, anytime anyone gives me a request, I will write it. I'll be like, yep, I'll write it for you. Like, because I want to make sure that they're getting that I'm responding to them and I really hear them and feel them. And also because whatever they're telling me is so universal.
Right.
And my job then is to just put it in words that can universalize it for everyone.
That's so I that was really inspiring. I kind of wish we'd started with this topic. But we had to obviously set the groundwork for it. The social media and the news. The social media we hear about all the time. But as I've said before, so anyone who's listened to this podcast for a while knows, I haven't been on social media in about 8 years. But the news, I last year started to realize had become an issue for me with
Yep.
my phone. And so first I stopped listening to news in the morning, but more recently, and basically at all. So now I only read news. And then the bigger step that I took, and I took it more recently, was I uninstalled Smart News off of my phone. I
Yeah.
don't know if you know that app. It's like news on crack. And so
Oh
it's like
no.
everything bad about Facebook brought to news.
Oh.
And like the instant,
Oh,
the infinite
sounds terrible.
scrolling. I know, but you get addicted to it. Anyway, I uninstalled it. And then I went out and I found a bunch of apps that only publish good news.
Oh, nice.
And because they're, they'll release only like 5 stories a day or something like, and so it's not an infinite scroll. If I have a hankering to get some news, I'll load it up. I know it'll be short. I know it'll be positive. And so I was telling Stephanie this, and Rajul, who we had on a show recently, that I've done this, and I could feel the difference right away. So these detoxes really do work if you put in the enforcement mechanism. So like if someone comes to you and says, now that I turned your story about you into one about me, let's
because it makes
back
sense.
to you.
It all makes sense. It's all universal.
So if someone comes to you and says, I want a news detox meditation, like how do you turn that request into an episode?
Well, I will sort of personalize it for me. Well, I don't do news. Like I just have, I've always hated news my entire life. So like, we don't even have cable in our house. Like we have a TV, but it only streams like Disney, right? Or like whatever child's stuff that we need for movies. So I live in Florida. I have to rely on my dad who lives in Arizona, who's addicted to the Weather Channel and will tell me if a hurricane's coming. That's my level of connection with news. So I will do my best to sort of personalize it. And because I do know that feeling of being overwhelmed by information and knowing that information has energy. And I think that we all can remember how we felt, right when the pandemic started. And that was like the only time that I can recall being really like, oh my God, I'm letting this stuff come in because I feel like I kind of need to. but then knowing like there was this moment where like, like we need to cut this off. I need to bubble myself in like that. And that was right for me. Right. So, what I try to do is always personalize it so that I can show, not tell. That's like cadence of writing, right? I want to show you how this feeling feels. And then I want to show you how and guide you through an experience that'll allow you to sort of like capture it and then let it go. And I'm going to sometimes I use very physical, talks and guidance in order to do that, relaxing your body, imagining, that all of it's, the breathing is gathering it all up. The breathing out is letting it go. So sometimes I use that very physical imagery. And sometimes it's a visualization of just getting into a more calmer space or spot. And sometimes it is just my relaxing voice sort of telling you what I think about it. And how you are good and beautiful and okay, despite all of this other stuff that you're feeling. So I'm a very visual person. So usually what ends up coming up is some sort of visual of what that representation is, what that feeling feels like, and then what it feels like to let go of that and not have that feeling. And that's the experience I'm giving you.
Great. So I love how you kind of embody the issue, whether it's something that news was something that you've already kind of cut out to, a large degree in your own life. Can you share some other kind of personal behaviors and practices as it comes to your tech use and how you kind of manage?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked me this question because no one asks this question, and I am very proud of how I manage tech. Actually, I literally almost every notification on my phone is off. I do not
Yay!
get the only notifications I get are from my calendar. And then like my team talks on WhatsApp, so I get those notifications. Asana, my team talks on Asana, so I get those notifications. None of them are overwhelming, like none of them. It's sort of like I needed to know that. I needed to know when this meeting was 10 minutes in advance, right? But social media notifications are off, email notifications are off. Anything that would bring up any sense of I need to go do that thing is off.
Love it.
Yeah. And then, even around my house, like we don't have a lot of tech in the house. We definitely have a TV. We definitely watch, movies or whatever streaming shows with the kids regularly. But we even manage that. Like there's, like I'm not the, kids only get half an hour of screen time every day. Like that's not me, but there's a natural sense that my husband and I have about like, is this some days we don't watch anything, some days we watch a lot because that's how it goes that day. And so there's that. We play a lot outside. I am outside a lot. And I put this in the tech conversation because I feel like it's the antithesis of tech. And so it is very important to sort of reconnect with nature so that you can handle tech in a very holistic way, in a very like intentional way. So I am in nature a lot. My feet are in the grass or in the dirt, where I'm going on walks a lot with my husband out in nature. I'm in the sun a lot, as you can tell. That to me is just as important as to what I say no to with tech.
That's really, yeah, because that's important. There's a growing body of science showing the positive impact of just exposing yourself just to looking at nature, much less being in it. But it's also an example of finding replacements. Like when I was giving the example of Smart News, I didn't say I just deleted it and hoped for the best. I said I deleted it and I looked for something else I could do in its place to sort of, and so replacement is a big part of making any of these tactics successful. And I really like the way that you approach. I mean, this is obviously something that you think a lot about. It sounded like, like you said, you were waiting for someone to ask you that question. So I'm glad that we could do that and the answer came out. Another thing I read is that a favorite motivational quote of yours is "stay in your lane." Now, I've definitely heard that quote before, often someone telling me I shouldn't be interfering with them. But so I know what it means to me, but I never would have thought of it as a motivational quote. So can you kind of contextualize that for me?
Yeah, I don't know when the hell I said that, but let's make that work for now.
I'll send you the link.
I'll make it work for now. Because I mean, I would imagine that it's very true. So I'm somebody who, I guess the way that I typically would look at that is that I'm the opposite of my husband. My husband needs 12 things going on at once in order to like keep moving and to like, he loves that juggle. I get overwhelmed by it. If I have more than 2 things on my plate at once, I am very, very overwhelmed. I kind of freak out and I freeze. So for me, that phrase is more about staying focused and going deeper into who I am and what I'm doing. And again, I mean, this conversation keeps coming back in circles in that, like, it's about saying no's. It's about identifying the no's, identifying the boundaries so that I can say deeper yeses to the big yeses. I'm very clear that being a mom and having quality time with my children is one of the biggest values of mine. And so staying in my lane there means, what decisions am I making? How does that value show up on my calendar? And how am I actually making quality time for my kids? How am I actually doing my best to shut off a boundary of work at a certain time so that I can have that time? I created this entire business so that I could have time freedom. So how am I making sure that I actually have that time freedom? So that might be a kind of a non-traditional definition of that particular quote, but
no, I totally see it.
Yeah.
I totally see it. And
well,
a
what
lot
I
of
hear,
people. Oh yeah.
I'm sorry, 1 second. What I have to interject. What I hear is not stay in your lane. I hear stay in the lane. Instead of going all over the place. So
it has nothing to do with anyone else. Like, it has to do with me. Like, how am I staying in the lane, this lane that I'm choosing to be on, that I've chosen, that I've completely, put all these pieces together to make my lane look like this. So how am I making sure to go into that deeper and deeper?
Do more by doing less, be happier by doing less. And I really like that kind of as an end note here, because I do feel like, myself included, speaking from personal experience, but a lot of us start our businesses with the hope of and the goal of taking control over our time, and then the business ends up controlling your time, and you feel hopeless. Like X and Y and Z has to change before I can reclaim my time. And by the time you achieve X, then A, B, and C are on that list. And the list keeps growing and you are further and further away from your goal. And so I really, really appreciate you kind of sharing that emphasis. And so I'm glad I asked that question. Even though I guess it felt a little like an ambush, I guess. I did not intend it that way. So
you asked me if I had things from my past, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything from your past we should stay away from? I was like, ooh, let's bring them up.
Yeah.
You're like, ooh,
I have a team of
remember,
researchers, Katie. I have a team of researchers. We go deep.
I love
it. Katie, where obviously we mentioned womensmeditationnetwork.com, and we'll link to that from the show notes, and we recommend all of our listeners go there. Is there anywhere else that you would like our listeners to connect with you and your content?
Yeah. So whatever podcast player you might be listening on right now or watching on right now, just go and search for Women's Meditation Network or Meditation for Women. Either one of those phrases will pull up every single one of our shows, and you can listen there. Personally, I'm on Instagram. Really, that's kind of the only social media place that I like to pop on every once in a while. So you can find me there at Katie Krimitsos. We also have Women's Meditation Network on Instagram as well, and across all social platforms. But as for me and my eyes, I tend to just be on Instagram.
Excellent. Thank you. And we'll include links to all of those in the show notes. So Katie, thank you so much for taking time out of your day today to come join us on the Healthier Tech Podcast. Again, our listeners, unless you're watching on YouTube, you won't see it, but I am smiling ear to ear. This has been such a joyful interview. And Katie, you've been a wonderful guest.
Oh, you guys, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure. Such a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Healthier Tech Podcast. Remember to check the show notes for all the links and resources mentioned in the show. Please like and subscribe to the Healthier Tech Podcast on Apple, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice. Get your free quick start guide to building a healthier relationship with technology and our latest information at healthiertech.co.